Chinese warships have entered America's exclusive economic zone. Chinese state-run media are calling it a countermeasure against the U.S. A Chinese ship rams into a Japanese ship. That's after Coast Guard ships from both countries had a confrontation over disputed territory. Wikipedia is banning a group of article editors from mainland China. The users reportedly threatened to dox and report Hong Kong users over political disagreements. A Chinese man says he learned about Hong Kong's fight for freedom through foreign social media. But after he voiced his support online, something went wrong. And a college graduate from Hong Kong tells us her story after fleeing to the U.S. to avoid the Chinese Communist Party's oppression. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 4 Chinese warships, including a Chinese destroyer, have sailed into the U.S.'s exclusive economic zone. Chinese state-run media says this is a warning to the U.S. about China's naval capabilities. NTD's Don Ma has more.
China looks to be sending a strong message to the U.S. about its maritime prowess. In a display of naval power, as per Chinese state-run media The Global Times, 4 advanced Chinese warships, including a destroyer, conducted naval operations in the U.S.'s exclusive economic zone near Alaska late last month. A country's exclusive economic zone is considered international waters. It's not part of a nation's territory, but a state does have the exclusive right to marine resources within the area. The Chinese ships included a guided missile destroyer, a guided missile cruiser, a general intelligence vessel, and an auxiliary vessel. The ships were spotted near Alaska's Aleutian Islands by 2 Legend-class U.S. Coast Guard ships. Pictures released by the Coast Guard showed the U.S. ships shadowing the Chinese ships. A statement by the Coast Guard on Monday says the Chinese vessels were conducting military and surveillance operations during their deployment to the Bering Sea and North Pacific Ocean. It looks like the Chinese ships didn't show any signs of aggression. The Coast Guard said that while the ships were within the U.S. exclusive economic zone, they followed international laws and norms and at no point entered U.S. territorial waters. According to Chinese state-run newspaper The Global Times, the Chinese warships near Alaska demonstrated the Chinese Navy's far-reaching capabilities. It also says the ship's presence at the U.S.'s doorstep is a sign of defiance against what the paper calls U.S. actions of hegemony. Don Ma, NTD News.
Chinese and Japanese Coast Guard ships recently had a confrontation over disputed territory. It ended with a Chinese ship ramming itself into a Japanese ship. The confrontation was over a group of Japanese fishing boats that sailed towards Japan's Senkaku Islands. China claims these islands as their own and sent ships to intercept the fishing boats. Likewise, Japan sent its Coast Guard to confront the Chinese ships. China warned it had let Japan off easy this time with a crash, but said that next time it won't be so lenient. The Japanese defense minister says that it spotted a Chinese destroyer ship and a Chinese submarine near its southern islands. This amid increasing maritime tensions in the region. The ministry said on Sunday that the vessels were traveling just outside territorial waters near Japan's Amami Oshima Island. This did not violate international laws, but can still be viewed as provocation. Japan's defense minister told his staff to gather information and maintain vigilant surveillance with a sense of urgency. As of Monday, Japan is still monitoring the suspected Chinese submarine. The country is gathering information and trying to find out the purpose of the submarine's presence. Japan has already voiced concern to Chinese diplomats. On Monday, Chinese state-run media Global Times responded to the incident. The article didn't firmly deny that the submarine came from China, but it does accuse Japan of hyping up the situation and the threat from China. In a rare move, Wikipedia is banning 7 Chinese editors and revoking administrator access for 12 others. That's after the users reportedly threatened their Hong Kong peers over political differences. Here's more.
The Wikimedia Foundation, which owns and operates Wikipedia, announced Monday that they permanently banned 7 top Chinese users from accessing the website globally. They also revoked administrator access for 12 others. The users all belong to a group called Wikimedians of mainland China, which the Wikimedia Foundation doesn't officially recognize. Hong Kong media HKFP reported in July that the mainland Chinese users threatened to dox and report Hong Kong users to the city's national security police for alleged political disagreements. Under Hong Kong's national security law, the government has broad powers to punish dissidents and critics. The Wikimedia Foundation's Vice President of Community Resilience and Sustainability, Maggie Dennis, said in a statement, "This case is unprecedented in scope and nature. We know that some users have been physically harmed as a result. With this confirmed, we have no choice but to act swiftly and appropriately in response." According to HKFP, the mainland Chinese and Hong Kong editors have been at war with each other over Wikipedia entries on Hong Kong political events. The so-called editing wars escalated during the city's 2019 pro-democracy protests. The mainland editors would cite Chinese state media, while the Hong Kong editors would cite independent Hong Kong media to describe the events. The Wikimedia statement goes on to say, "The situation we are dealing with today has shown me how much we need as a movement to grapple with the hard questions of how we remain open to editing by anyone anywhere while ensuring that individuals who take us up on that offer are not harmed by those who want to silence them." Since 2012, Wikipedia has banned only 86 other users.
Next, we look at one Chinese man's story after he learned about Hong Kong's fight for freedom on foreign social media. But after he voiced his support for the city's pro-democracy movement online, something went wrong. Let's take a look.
Death sentence threats, hours of interrogation, and high-level surveillance. That's what Zhang Yucheng recalls after he was detained by Chinese police in 2020. His offense? Posting on Twitter.
I did two things on Twitter. I wrote an article called "The Death of June 4th, now staged in Hong Kong." Then I did something else, in which I went to the Great Wall and took this photo.
The message reads, "I oppose the Hong Kong national security law." That's the law Beijing imposed on the city last year, which clamps down on anything the Chinese regime considers disloyal. Every year, the 4th of June marks the anniversary of a bloody crackdown in 1989. When China quashed student-led pro-democracy protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. On that day last year, Zhang expressed his support for Hong Kong's democracy movement on Twitter.
I would like to tell my compatriots in Hong Kong that not all people on the mainland are ignorant. Not all of them are full of class antagonism, as described by the Communist Party.
But Hong Kongers weren't the only ones who saw Zhang's message. Despite Zhang blurring the photo and registering an account under a different phone number, police in China were still able to locate him. They called him into the police station for questioning and threatened to arrest him if he didn't show up. Here's what the police said to him.
I can tell you very reasonably, China's situation is now more serious than the time of the Cultural Revolution. You just haven't seen it and don't know. So if it's like the Cultural Revolution, this would be a counter-revolutionary crime and eligible for the death penalty. That's what he told me.
While in custody, Zhang was made to write statements of remorse and was kept awake all night. After paying over $1,000 in bail, Zhang was released. But his story didn't end there. The Chinese regime soon began monitoring Zhang's every move. He tells us about one instance when he was pulled over by a police car.
What was getting pulled over like before? They check your car, your ID card, then you can go. Or sometimes they open the trunk to check. Now it's different. As soon as you hand over your ID card, they say, "Please get out of the car. Go to the side. Who are you? What are you going to do in Beijing? What's your purpose?"
On another occasion, Zhang had left home to go shopping in Beijing. That's when he received a call from an official asking Zhang when he would return home.
At that moment, I felt that I was still under their surveillance. I felt like there were invisible eyes you didn't know about, that are always watching. All your movements are exposed. You are not free.
Due to increasing pressure, Zhang moved to the U.S. He now lives in Los Angeles. According to reports, Twitter users and those using other foreign social media inside China often face arrest, detention, and other threats. Overseas-based social media platforms are blocked inside China, but many still find ways to access them, either through VPNs or other tools used to bypass China's great censorship firewall. But it's getting increasingly dangerous to do. More than 50 people have been jailed in China over the past 3 years just for accessing the platforms.
Now we turn to an update on the pandemic in China. New infections have more than doubled in the southeastern Fujian province. That's based on news from health authorities Tuesday. In just 4 days, over 150 total infections have been reported in 3 Fujian cities. Putian, the hardest hit of them, Quanzhou and Xiamen, a tourist and transport hub with a population of 5 million. The outbreak began in Putian with the first case reported on Friday. According to experts, the resurgence was sparked by the Delta variant. The outbreak then spread south to Xiamen. The city reported more than 30 new infections on Tuesday. Due to the cover-up history of the Chinese Communist regime, we cannot verify the figures independently. Like Putian, Xiamen has locked down some areas that pose higher infection risk, on top of shutting down schools, closing public venues, and telling residents not to leave the city. According to aviation data provider VeriFlight, about 60% of flights to and from Xiamen were canceled on Tuesday. While both cities began mass virus testing the same day, 5 new cases were also reported in nearby city Quanzhou. VeriFlight data revealed 70% of Quanzhou's flights were canceled. The outbreaks come ahead of China's week-long National Day holiday. The occasion marks the formation of China's communist regime and is a major tourist season. A college graduate from Hong Kong fled to the U.S. months ago. She tells NTD her story of fighting against the Chinese Communist Party's tyranny, reflection of many of the voices of her generation.
Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement rewrote the fate of a generation, but the movement seems not to have maintained the city's freedoms. Many young people who participated in the movement choose to leave to avoid living under the Chinese Communist Party's rule. NTD spoke with a college graduate who fled Hong Kong to the U.S.
I don't think I will stay outside Hong Kong for a long time. I've been expecting this to end very soon, and the Chinese Communist Party to collapse soon. I'll be able to return to Hong Kong then. To go back home is my hope.
Joy told us many of her classmates can't afford to leave, but even though they dare not speak out, they would never willingly obey the Communist Party or CCP. Her generation has learned about the CCP's atrocious history, and then they witnessed it playing out again in their lives.
By 2014, this government wanted to implement national education. It was like brainwashing, trying to nurture us to love the country and the party. At that time, we students were very much against it. In 2019, the government wanted to introduce an extradition law amendment to send you back to the mainland to try you. So we were very opposed to it. We thought it would abuse the law and send dissidents back to the mainland for trial. That's why we had an anti-extradition movement.
Joy participated in a protest march in June 2019, along with 2 million others. She says Hong Kong's younger generation longs for the collapse of the CCP. She says then Hong Kong will be saved.
The 2019 Hong Kong movement pushed the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia to, it seems, fight against the CCP. Hong Kong has had a great influence. I believe the movement is definitely worth it.
In 2020, the CCP pushed the national security law on Hong Kong. In many residents' eyes, it's a tool for Beijing to suppress them at will.
This national security law for us is terrifying. So many people wanted to flee Hong Kong. Some of my schoolmates left. They left with the idea of helping Hong Kong. That's how they are when they leave.
Joy told us these young people set up a website, Clandestine in Hong Kong, to record their stories. She said she believes it's an important endeavor because the CCP will distort history in its telling of events.
It's like what happens to the general education books. Many things I learned have been changed into serving a brainwashing purpose.
Joy believes the CCP will demonize the anti-extradition movement, but the website's content recounts true events, and so it has historic values.
The U.S. stock market regulator is finding 3 companies affiliated with an exiled Chinese billionaire. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, issued a penalty on Monday over the company's illegal unregistered stock and digital asset offerings. The 3 firms agreed to pay over $500 million to settle, but did not admit to or deny the accusation. The companies, New York-based GTV Media Group, Serica Media Group, and Phoenix-based Voice of Guo Media, are all affiliated with Guo Wengui, or Miles Guo. Guo fled China in 2014 and lives in exile in New York. He portrayed himself as a dissident, but is known for having connections to former top officials from China's Communist Party. From April to June 2020, all three media outlets asked investors to back GTV's stock offering, while two of them, GTV and Serica, also marketed a new digital asset called G-Coins or G-Dollars. The firms promoted the offerings through their websites and social media platforms. SEC statement explains the three outlets failed to register those security offerings, but used them to raise about $500 million from more than 5,000 investors. Miles Guo responded to the action, posting that he has accepted the SEC fine. He added that working with the SEC had been a, quote, success. Two Chinese companies are planning to further develop a huge copper mine in Afghanistan. The Taliban tore the mine on Monday. The Mes Aynak copper mine is about 25 miles southeast of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Chinese companies had been developing it. Jiangxi Copper Co. Limited and the Metallurgical Corporation of China, or MCC, were monitoring the Afghanistan situation, which they said was hindering construction of the mine. The two Chinese companies got a 30-year lease for the mine in 2008. The mine is estimated to have a reserve of over 11 million tons of copper. Jiangxi Copper said the companies would push forward with the mine when the situation allows. Chinese authorities are reportedly clearing landmines on the border between China and Burma, also called Myanmar. The Chinese regime had built a 1,000-mile-long barbed wire fence along the border between southwestern China's Yunnan province and Burma to block civilians from crossing the border without permission. Later, it added landmines along the border. A picture online appears to show a Burmese local government issued notice last Thursday, stating that the Chinese regime had planted landmines along the border. The notice says after negotiations, the Chinese regime agreed to remove the landmines within 2 months. The notice reminds civilians not to go to the demining area and not to panic when they hear landmines exploding. A hotel attendant in a Chinese town at the border on Monday confirmed to Radio Free Asia that Chinese military personnel were clearing landmines. Landmines are weapons of war. An international convention on landmines says these weapons must not be used during peacetime. An insider told Radio Free Asia the Chinese regime believed that the recent CCP virus or coronavirus emerging in the border area had come from Burma, and that the landmines were a tool to stop people crossing over from Burma with the virus. He said it was also an attempt to prevent Chinese people from coming into contact with religious groups from Burma. After lying low for much of the pandemic, North Korea's Kim Jong-un is back with another attention-grabbing stunt, a dangerous weapons test, which many believe is an attempt to steer President Biden's attention toward Pyongyang.
A show of defiance and military ambition from North Korea's menacing young dictator. Kim Jong-un's forces have just test-fired a new type of long-range cruise missile, according to North Korean state media, which published pictures of a missile flying off a mobile launcher and a missile in mid-flight. The North Koreans claim the missiles flew for more than 2 hours in oval and figure-8 patterns and landed in the sea more than 900 miles away. Experts say these cruise missiles cannot reach the continental United States, but pose a danger nonetheless.
What that means is bringing into bear U.S. forces and our allies in Japan, South Korea, and all kinds of other places. So now we have to worry about North Korea that has, yes, the ballistic missiles, but also the drones and the cruise missiles. And all of that added together is a complex and integrated attack, whereby they can come in from all different directions, all kind of trajectories and altitudes, and construct an attack that's much more complicated to defend against.
The cruise missile test comes just days after a spectacular and bizarre midnight parade through Kim Il-sung Square in Pyongyang. No missiles on display. Instead, a canine squad, a unit in orange hazmat suits, and an image that stunned analysts. Kim Jong-un looking strikingly thinner than he had just a few months before.
Is it really in North Korea's interest to show to the rest of the world that Kim Jong-un is shedding weight? And if that has, health issues, then how is North Korea going to manage succession, the internal stability, and all these other issues that are going to be important to, countries like the United States and South Korea?
Kim was even shown in propaganda footage appearing to enjoy a bright green drink with a twisty straw. All part of what looks like a reemergence of the supreme leader on the world stage, following the height of the coronavirus pandemic, when he sealed off his country to everyone, including China, and following Kim's high-profile summits with former President Donald Trump. Kim tested shorter-range ballistic missiles earlier this year. The missile tests, the slimmed-down look, analysts believe could be a calculation from Kim to steer President Biden's attention his way.
We have to think about the atmospherics now, where we're all consumed by the pandemic. The United States was also involved in the pullout of Afghanistan, so North Korea knows that the United States can't give it the due attention that it wants. The best thing that he could do now is to continue to basically poke the needle in our side to remind us that North Korea remains a persistent threat.
While analysts say these latest missile tests are a way for Kim Jong-un to get the Biden administration's attention, they're also worried that it could be part of an accelerated arms race with South Korea that could get worse. South Korea has ramped up its own missile capability in recent weeks, including a test of a submarine-launched ballistic missile. North Korea has regularly tested missile launches ever since the 80s. According to Bloomberg reports, in the 2000s and 2010s, North Korea tested around a dozen missile launches. But the country stopped its testing for 2 years, between 2018 and 2020, when President Trump was in office. Yet it seems North Korea is now resuming testing. The leader of Peru's Communist Party dies in prison. He is most known for masterminding a bloody Maoist revolution that nearly toppled the South American country back in the 1980s and 90s. Here's more.
Professor turned radical rebel leader Abimael Guzman has died. The Peruvian government said the founder of the Shining Path guerrilla group died in his prison cell Saturday morning. Awed by China's Cultural Revolution, the lifelong communist launched a class war in 1980, transforming radical students and a band of peasants into Latin America's most stubborn guerrilla force. He led his supporters into the Andes Mountains, leading a bloody Marxist revolution that attacked security forces and officials, among others. Over 2 decades, the internal conflict launched by the Shining Path killed roughly 69,000 people. Captured by police in 1992, he was convicted as a terrorist and was serving 2 life sentences when he died, just 1 day before the anniversary of his capture. Peru's defense minister said Guzman died of a generalized infection. In a tweet, President Pedro Castillo called him a terrorist leader and blamed him for the loss of what he said was an uncountable number of lives. The Shining Path has largely collapsed as a military threat, but remnants remain to this day.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have an announcement. If you're interested in a short weekly summary of what's really going on in China and some behind-the-scenes content of what we're up to, make sure you subscribe to our China in Focus newsletter. You can find the link to sign up in the description box down below. Every Friday morning, the latest will land in your inbox. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.